So Charlie, what do we need to talk about? What's the most important thing?
Well, I don't think much is happening. So
yeah, there's not much going on.
Yeah, it's a slow news cycle, as they might say. Look, it's a very interesting time. I've actually done a lot of traveling in the last few weeks, which is you must really hate yourself if you do that. You have to wear the mask the entire time, and it's not exactly fun. But been to Michigan, Florida. I was in New York, all across the country. I was in D.C. yesterday, in Arizona this morning, and here I am with you. I feel that it's more urgent than ever to be able to get truth out in front of people. Yeah. And I think that right now, we as a country are seeing what happens when good people decide to do nothing, and when certain good people, such as yourself, Jack, and your congregation, start to stand up for truth. So look, I'm processing this in real time like all of you, and I'm starting to realize a couple things. The first of which is this. What's happening tonight in the churches across America, this is going to be the salvation of our country. It really will.
That's right.
The church is the key to the moral order of a civil society. And there's a reason why they want to keep the churches closed. There's a reason why they don't want you to be able to congregate. It's because as soon as all of you start to attend and you listen to the greatest, most important book ever to exist in the history of the world, when you start to understand the teachings of Jesus Christ, when you start to understand that our rights are natural, that come from God, not from government, all of a sudden Gavin Newsom means a lot less in your world. All of a sudden... And maybe it also opens and liberates conversation. Maybe all of a sudden you realize that it's going to be free people in a free society that are going to come across to the best solutions, not these bureaucratic, top-down orders that have just so much harm and pain and suffering on people across the country that I've seen, Jack. And I'll tell you this, that as the churches start to reopen, I'm starting to see it. Pastors are starting to follow, because it takes leaders like Jack to pay the price, and he goes forward, and then people start to follow. And we're starting to see, in my opinion, a tonal shift in our country in the last couple weeks. Even in the last couple days, I can feel it. All of a sudden, people are, and I felt the Holy Spirit here tonight, I think you do as well.
Yeah,
where all of a sudden, look, the forces of darkness are going to strike their hardest right before truth is really going to spread and win. That is when the forces of darkness are going to do their full frontal offensive. And boy, have we seen that in the last couple weeks, in the last couple months. And what I'm telling you, I am bringing you, I believe, very good news that we are close to something that is so righteous and good and true, where I think we're going to have a revival in our country, the likes of which we have never seen.
Yeah.
I truly believe that.
I do believe that. Yeah. Charlie, you said something on one of your recent podcasts, I think it was with Eric Metaxas. You made mention of the fact that, which was fantastic, that the rioting, the pillaging, the protesting that's going on in the streets, in the correlation between that and the churches being sequestered.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really puzzling thing for me why some people are confused about this. They say, why is it that so many people are angry and looking for meaning? I say, well, it's because you closed the churches down, man. I mean, church is more than just flipping on your TV at 10:30 in your pajamas in the living room. Church is the ecclesia, the gathering of believers. It's you turning to your friend and saying, how you doing? And they say, honestly, I'm not doing well. Right. I need you, and I needed that message today. And what we have been led to believe is now church is nothing more than a digital consumption exercise, where church is a 24/7, 365 institution, where it's brothers helping believers, helping sisters, helping people in need. And so then we remove that, and I asked Jack this today, and I said, on average, how many people come to Christ on Easter Sunday? And he says anywhere probably between 100 to 150, maybe even more. On an Easter Sunday, the most important day that we celebrate as Christians, for good reason. They stole that from us, and we let them. They stole Easter Sunday from us, and I think to myself, my goodness, how many millions of lost souls out there would have become Bible-believing Christians on Easter Sunday if the churches would have remained open? How many people would have dropped down their idolatry of fake witness and said, Jesus, come into my life? Yeah. And yet the secular humanist state has said, keep your church closed because I told you so. And then all of a sudden we wonder why in late May, We see a destruction of civil society because, oh my gosh, we forgot that it was the church that built civil society.
That's right.
And when civil society starts to crumble and you don't have the singular thing that founded that very civil society, it should be a rather logical thing. Maybe you should open the institution that gives people meaning and gives them an understanding what responsibility is and a connection to the Almighty and the sacraments of communion. And so there's a direct connection there. And I think there's a reason for it. It's because the statists understand, and the people that want to control you, because that's what this is about. This is about power. They want government to become God. They want white fragility to become the Bible. They want the 1619 Project to be more well-versed in the teachings of Matthew. And if you think I'm joking, just step into a public school in LA Unified School District and you'll see exactly what I mean. They know that if they can hurt the church, if they can weaken the church, then all of a sudden they will replace man's search for meaning with government becoming that deity, with Nicole Hannah-Jones from the New York Times becoming the next philosophical leader where she just spouts garbage and nonsense professionally every single day. And so we have to understand very clearly, and you've done such a great job of this, Jack, and I'm inspired by you, and you're a hero for this, which is we are not going to allow tyranny in our country to exist any longer, whether it be Gavin Newsom, whether it be the little micro-tyranny. And here's a really important point, is that we should protest and recall Gavin Newsom. And he's a coward. He's not, what is he going to do? I mean, come on. I mean, he really is a very weak person. And no, I mean this, and I pray, I truly do genuinely pray for him. And where he prioritizes Planned Parenthood abortion clinics and marijuana dispensaries over the body and blood of Jesus Christ. And he argues the church is not essential, and I think that's actually a wrong phrasing, by the way. I think a better way to phrase it and ask, is salvation essential? It's not just essential, it's like the only important thing, right? I mean, the idea of essential is somehow there's a hierarchy of something more important than salvation. And so, look, Gavin Newsom, he says, well, I might arrest people. I say, well, you won't be the first Christian to pay a price for what is good and what is right and what is true. And so if they come arrest Jack, come arrest me alongside of Jack, because I'll tell you what, it's about time Christians start standing for something in this country. And here's the one thing is, make no mistake, this is a social conditioning exercise where they're trying to see how far they can push us, right? Right. They're trying to see, oh, wow, the Christians won't speak if we take Easter and Palm Sunday from them. They won't speak out if we take Pentecost from them. They won't speak out if month after month after month, all of a sudden, the physical institution of the church and the gathering, the ecclesia of believers mean nothing. But the moment that someone like Jack Hibbs or Rob McCoy says, oh, no, come arrest us, they're like, oh, yeah, just kidding, sorry. And by the way, they might storm through this right now like Mao's Red Guard with their little red book and the Praetorian Guard. And guess what? Jack and I will say, fine. The part of the doctrine of civil disobedience is we will pay the price, but you are going to have a couple thousand very angry local people that are not going to like that.
They're voters.
And they vote and they pay taxes. And the silent majority won't be silent much longer. And they are betting that our decency translates into apathy. And I can tell you this, there is a lot of green space between us being decent and us being indecent. And I'm telling you, I will never think we should get to indecent, but that doesn't mean we have to be quiet. It's a very important thing. It's an incredibly important distinction. Because, and I truly believe this, some Christian pastors have been emailing me privately and say, Charlie, what do I do? And I say, in some ways, why don't you surrender anything that is earthly for the divine truth to be able to bring people to Jesus Christ? And they say, I might lose my church. And I say, well, first of all, you probably won't, but even if you do, if you fight for what is right and for what is good and for what is true, isn't that what we are called to do every single day?
Every day.
And so, and what the great irony of this entire thing, and it kind of reminds me of some of the people in the Republican Party where I've tried to see if they have a spine, and I can't quite figure out if they do or not, which is the great irony, and I'll do the connection in a second, is that this church has never flourished like it has now, it has never grown, because people right now in times of chaos are looking for order, they're looking for truth. Churches that actually stand have record attendance, record tithing, record conversions, record salvation, record amounts of people that are looking for that meaning. And so, I'll tell you what, as Ernest Hemingway said, this is going to happen gradually then suddenly. The bad guys are going to be on the run very quickly as soon as reasonable and decent people stop being the silent majority and the vocal majority. It's going to happen very, very quickly.
Charlie, we've got radical civil unrest in
Yeah.
many of the West Coast cities, the key cities. Just the other day, Jerry Nadler, when asked about the pillaging and the rioting of Portland, Oregon, Nadler said that Antifa and that action is a myth. It's not happening.
You know, it's so incredibly Orwellian what's happening right now. And if you don't know, if you haven't read 1984 or Animal Farm, I encourage you to do it. It's like reading the LA Times. It's happening in real time. And let me explain to you how Orwellian thinking works. It was written by George Orwell in the 1950s. Orwell was a socialist until he wasn't, because he actually realized what that nonsense, backwards worldview actually believed. His most famous quote with socialism, I just love it, it's so perfect. Orwell said, "Socialism is much more about hating the rich than helping the poor." I said, that is just perfect. And so Orwell wrote 1984, and in it he talks about that even worse than a lie, there's something that can be called doublethink or doublespeak or newspeak. So here's how it works, and this is what's happening with Jerry Nadler and the left, where it's much worse than them lying to us. So let's pretend Jack is eating some cookies here, and I go up to Jack, I say, "Jack, how many cookies have you eaten?" And he says, "I've only eaten 3. He really ate 10. That would be a lie, right? Here's how doublespeak works. I go up to Jack and I say, "Jack, how many cookies have you eaten?" And he's got crumbs all over his face and cookies. And he says, I haven't eaten any cookies." "You have." No, trust me, I've eaten no cookies. I promise, no cookies." "No, you've eaten all the cookies. In fact, you're also a racist." I'm like, "No, I'm not." Like, "No, I promise." He's like, "Shut up and take a knee. I've never eaten cookies. You're also a bad person and your country is awful." Like, "No, I promise, I haven't eaten cookies." And you start to think to yourself, well, what kind of bizarre thing? And that's doublespeak, and it's 1984 dystopianism, and he prophesies it perfectly. And look, it's really, in 1 Timothy, what's the exact verse? To live quiet and peaceable lives, right?
God tells us that he wants us to pray for the king and those that are over us in authority, that what's the reason? That we might live a quiet and peaceable life.
So not Portland, basically.
Not Portland, not Seattle, not LA.
I was reading that the other day. I said, my goodness, he was telling us to live lives like whatever's not happening in downtown Seattle and the former country that used to be called Chaz or Chop or whatever that wonderful experiment was, which really interests me because, you know, I visit college campuses so you don't have to, and and I deal with these people, right? And it's a very sinister combination between remarkable arrogance and resentment and totally uninformed opinion, right? So they're so committed to being correct. They're constantly wrong, but they're never in doubt. It's an incredible combination, right?
That's well said.
So I'll never forget one of these rocket scientist philosophers came up to me. He was 20 and he had taken a philosophy course, so he knew everything about philosophy. And University of Minnesota, and I think I saw him on television the other day, burning down a building or something. I was like, that's the guy. I knew he was destined for great things. And so, it was a couple years ago at University of Minnesota, and he said, "Charlie, you don't understand. Once we get rid of police and private property, that's when human beings can go back to their normative state, the primitive state, and everything will go back into a utopian place." And this is an idea that was theorized by the French fool. If you want to know where most bad ideas from, just go to France. I mean, my gosh, just Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I mean, the guy was a hypocritical, privileged brat who basically, we got a lot of our bad ideas in the West from him, but he argued very, very bluntly that we should have the primitive over the civilized, the infant over the adult, the passionate lover over the calm spouse. I mean, basically everything your child learns in college can be originated back to this clueless, let's stop there, a guy from France by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So this idea of we just get rid of, it's society that's the problem, it's not us. No, you're actually awesome. You are perfect. You don't have original sin, it's societal sin. That's what you have to understand that the difference is right now, right? So this philosopher from University of Minnesota who just took a freshman introductory class of How to Hate America, right? And so he was telling me, Charlie, you don't understand, it's this great thing. And I'll never forget this conversation because I said, one day you're gonna get what you want and it's not going to end well. And I said, one day you guys are gonna get so bold and you might actually form your own little communal country. And write me a memo on how that goes. And he said, I can't wait, it'll be brilliant, the revolution is coming. And this was a couple years ago, and they actually ended up acting on these foolish ideas. And so they founded Chaz or CHOP or whatever, which in a very interesting way, I was perplexed by this. And at Turning Point USA, we sent journalists into Chaz, and we infiltrated it, and they had borders. It was really bizarre.
Yes.
It was like,
guarded.
That was the first
guards.
thing. And they had ID checks. I'm like, well, now we can have voter ID everywhere now, right? Because in order to get into Chaz, you had to check your identification. And so they also, so you go in there and they have no police and all this, and incredibly bad things continued to happen. And tragically, 2 people died, and 1 African-American black kid died who was a teenager, murdered. And it's this amazing thing, Jack, when you get rid of police, people still do bad things. It's almost as if original sin actually exists in our world, and that the Bible is completely correct, that we're broken, so unbelievably depraved by nature that we are in need of a Savior that only a loving God could deliver to us, that it's actually what is in our book is true and right. And so, but this is what we're up against. And I want to just frame this for you because you say, who could possibly defund the police? Who could want that? They come from a worldview.
That's right.
That we are actually awesome human beings. That we by nature are good. This is what we're up against. Right, what's happening right now, and this is what really frustrates me with a lot of the Republican Party, is just how myopic they get in their conversation. They're like, well, maybe we can pass a police reform bill, and maybe you can, maybe you can't, but you're missing the broader point. We have just introduced a national conversation on human nature, and you think this is about police reform?
Exactly.
This is a beautiful opportunity to be able to defend something that through 5,000 years of history and this incredible book that tells us that is ultimate truth, that human beings are broken by nature. And we know this, and the left doesn't believe this. They actually are so incredibly confident in their own hubris, in their own philosopher king world. I can fix human beings. All we have to do is get rid of the police and then give a little health care and no borders and all. Of course, it's a bunch of rubbish and nonsense and balderdash. But I got all sorts of words that are non-swear words to describe the left, by the way. Being a podcaster that has PG-rated audience, it's the amount of words I can use to describe the American left is limitless. So that's a fun sidebar. So yeah, I guess the point was about Jerry Nadler, and that's to kind of complete the point was this, they truly believe, the radical left absolutely and completely believes that society is a mistake, that the systems we have around us are systems of oppression that must be dismantled, undone, and deconstructed because they have the better idea to be implemented, and then we can actually be harmonious people in utopia, which literally means nowhere, if you look at actually what utopia means. That's what they believe. So right now we're in a discussion on human nature. We should win that conversation. We should win that argument, I should say.
Do you think there's any I think you just answered this actually, but just to highlight it, do you think there's any correlation to the fact that 2 of the least churched cities in America happen to be Portland and Seattle?
Of course.
There's almost no presence
Amen.
of church witness.
And it would be nice to hear a Republican say that once, wouldn't it? I mean, but look, here's, and I say this is, we have an amazing opportunity to be able to defend right now something that is true. And Paul says it, defend whatsoever is true. I mean, we are called to Christians to call out things that are not correct, not factual, not true in every single part of our life. Because everything that you encounter matters. We're told that as Christians. Anytime that something that gets told that is rooted in a lie, that is a tool used by the evil one to try to deceive us and bring us into confusion and chaos. So when people say something like, everything's actually wonderful in Portland, you don't understand. 56 days of riot and anarchy. This is actually, it's a summer of love, actually, is what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's summer of love until they start protesting outside of the mayor's office, right? Which is what they do. And so, yes, there's a direct correlation. And we have to understand that this country that was founded, it wasn't an accident. And that's a really important thing that we have to teach our kids. Unlike other kind of civilization toppling and just the constant cycle, if you will. We are going to control this piece of land and we're going to put it over with our tradition. Our country is so different than that. We don't teach our young people. This was a deliberative process of reading, reflecting, praying, and fasting of what do we want to create. And this was founded. This wasn't something that we backed into like, oh my gosh, what if we just have this free speech thing? I came up with it and everyone can say whatever they want. Everyone's going to own guns, and like Ben Franklin, like this country's going to be lit, right? Like this is going to be great. Right? No, there's a reason for all of this, right? This wasn't some sort of juvenile experiment in trying to have people indulge themselves. This was a study of Mesopotamia and Athens and Greece and Rome and Aristotle and Plato and Aquinas and Descartes and Hume and Locke.
Sure.
And you said, okay, here's what they got wrong, here's what they got right, and the Enlightenment understood this, and Locke theorized very simply that, yes, we have natural law, and from natural law we have natural rights, and then they said, well, what if it's a theocracy? They said, that won't work because then you're a state-run religion, actually make people less likely to go to church, so let's have ideas that are actually built upon that of Christianity, the Bible, the greatest book ever to exist in the history of the world. We like that, and everyone in our population is basically understands this is the moral order, but we want to have a pluralistic society and
That's right.
the freedom of speech because good ideas must be defended, not be just shoved down people's throats, because if we just say this is what it is, people are going to find a way to disconnect from it because that's human nature. They want to challenge and question. We know that from the Enlightenment, and we know that from basically the problems that the Catholic Church had with trying to have state-run religion. The founders didn't want that, but they still wanted the moral order. And that's why in our birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence says the laws of nature and nature's God, very explicitly, where it said, you know what, King George, this whole tyranny and autocracy thing, not so fast, my friend. We have a better idea from ideas that are derived from the law of Abraham and Moses and the tradition of the Bible that was fulfilled by the covenant of Jesus Christ. We're going to try out freedom of speech, protect our family, rights to privacy, states' rights, and guess what? If we get something wrong, we can course correct it because we don't have to worry about your tyranny, one-size-fits-all centralized control. We have a republic, if we can keep it. Let's see what happens. This was the biggest risk in human history.
That's right.
I want you to understand, there was no precedent to this. It
That's
wasn't,
right.
they had very little to no civilization precedent. They took this risk and they said, we actually trust our people who were freedom-seeking pilgrims who brought everything across the Atlantic Ocean. Many of them died. Even more of them paid a huge price in more ways than one. Go forth, try out this liberty thing. And oh my goodness, it spread like wildfire. Every country that has civil society, they should say, thanks, America, we owe you. We started it, we rebelled against tyranny for a reason, for a moral good and a moral government. And we should be proud of that every single day. And for the societal deconstructionists and the arsonists that try to say this bitter lie, they say, well, America was founded on slavery. And if I may, Jack, go into this.
You're quoting now, who is that?
Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Yes.
She has a very perplexing
I just want to make
aesthetic.
sure we give credit.
She has red hair. I just don't quite. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
No.
I want to give credit where credit is due. When complete rubbish gets spewed from the paper of record, I want to make sure I get it right. Unlike them, because they don't get it right. So Nicole Hannah-Jones, she is on a pathological campaign to make sure your kids hate America. And so Nicole Hannah-Jones, red hair, see her on TV, always talking about how awful white people are and how awful our country is. She's a bitter racist. I actually call her racist because I think racism is hatred of anyone of any skin color at any time. I think it is sinful and hateful and awful, and it is a sin. That's simple. Okay.
Yeah.
So she says that our country was founded in 1619, the first year that slaves came to our country. This is not correct. It's not. So if you actually look at the founding of our country, 1776, this great leap forward, 2,000 years forward, derived, of course, from the teachings of Athens and the combination of Jerusalem, Aristotle, Plato, Descartes, Aquinas, Locke, all the best practices put into one, authored by who? Thomas Jefferson, very important, I'll get back to him in a second, who says, laws of nature and nature's God. What happens in 1777? First state ever to abolish slavery, Vermont, says that's it, we're done. Why? We're inspired by this document. They abolished slavery. We were inspired on the abolition of slavery. When they were putting together the Constitution, it was never a conversation, ever. Don't let the people, the New York Times or Nicole Hannah-Jones tell you any different.
That's
it was
right.
never a question of whether or not we would have slavery. It was how we were going to get rid of this sinful practice. It was around for thousands of years. It was around before Christ. It was around after Christ. It is a sin. So our country was founded. Constitutional Convention, 1787. In 1787, George Washington says no new slaves at all, no slavery in the Northwest Territories. So anything forward, no slavery at all. They won't teach your kids that. Then, moving forward, in the Constitution, you can read it yourself, 20-year moratorium on the slave trade. You got 20 years, southern states, then it is coming to an end. Reappears Thomas Jefferson, who actually introduced a bill in the early 1790s in the Virginia House of Commons, who said that slavery was an awful practice. I want to get rid of it. Now, mind you, it was probably one of the most perplexing pieces of hypocrisy in history because he himself was a slave owner, but he still was arguing for a moral good societally, failed in the Virginia House eventually. Eventually, of course, it succeeded. We saw in the 1790s, almost every single northern state abolished slavery. By the time 1807 happened, Thomas Jefferson had his time to shine. Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States of our country. That 20 years, tick, 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 in the Constitution, right? They did that as a bargain with the southern states. Thomas Jefferson, on the first day he was legally able to abolish the incoming of any new slaves into the United States of America 20 years into our founding. That is something we should be proud of. We were founded from the moment that we started that said that this was wrong and this is evil. Now, mind you, it wasn't a perfect history. It went through decades of ups and downs, and we went through a bloody civil war. But show me another country that sacrificed so much, brother against brother and father against son, to accomplish something that what? The churches were screaming in the pews and the pulpits, and Thaddeus Stevens was inspired by a pastor to go to Congress and say, slavery is anti-American. Our founders said it. Thaddeus Stevens said it. We fought this bitter civil war, and Abraham Lincoln kept the republic together on this unionist idea that I think America's best day can be ahead of us, where all men are equal and free. Fast forward all the way to Frederick Douglass, where he says that we need to abolish slavery. Why? Because I'm so inspired by the Declaration of Independence. He was an abolitionist, a black Republican who understood it. Go all the way fast forward to the great Martin Luther King Jr., who himself lived a very, let's say, he had questionable moral decisions, but he was arguing for what? A moral good. Why do I keep on saying this? Because people can act sinfully personally, but argue for something righteously publicly, and they should be remembered for what they did good publicly, not for what they did less than desirably privately. It's a very important thing. People say, well, we got to get rid of all these people, but dare you forget what they sacrificed for our country. And Martin Luther King said in that beautiful speech, I come here to cash in the check of the promissory note of the Declaration of Independence. He didn't say that this document was racist. He didn't say we got to shred it from its roots. He says, this document says all men are created equal. And I'm telling you, Congress, to pass the Civil Rights Act. From that moment that we started this country to the Civil Rights Act of the 1960s, it was a constant theme, a march and a progression to be better. And isn't that what we do every single day in our own life, to try to be better today than we were yesterday? We cannot forget our history. We should be proud of it. No other country has pursued a moral good like the United States of America. Be proud of this country.
Charlie, are we not, though, now reaping 50, 60 years of university what's the word?
Indoctrination.
Indoctrination, and I was going to say a detox from truth regarding the teaching of wrong history, teaching of absolute craziness, where now these kids are adults, and now they're in Congress, or now they're running, they're whatever they are, and they hate this nation. They don't even know it. They don't even know a bit of what you just said. No. Have we not made these kids in our universities and our public school system?
Absolutely. And look, this is going to be a very difficult thing for us to societally unpack as a culture in the next couple of years. But we have to admit that we were much more afraid of us losing societal status than our kids possibly being trained to not believe in God and hate America. And we sent our kids to these universities for decades, and then they all of a sudden become bitter, resentful activists in the streets, and we said, where did I go wrong? Well, the indoctrination camp might have played a very big role in that. And it's a mass media campaign, and understand, I'm actually very optimistic about this, because I think that in some ways, I do believe that, well, first of all, we're going to win because we've already won. And so it's really, in some ways, the battle was already done by Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. So in some ways, all of this is kind of just, let's bring as many people along, let's do the best we can and all that. So I have a cheerfulness to me when I'm able to fight this stuff. Do you realize we're up against very bitter, resentful, and arrogant people. Do you notice that? And they're bitter in some ways because a lot of them have not yet come to Christ. They don't believe in God. They're resentful for not very good reason, but they've been taught ingratitude, right? So here's the divide that's happened in America right now, is that we have one side of our country that is incredibly angry that they live in America. The other side is incredibly thankful that they live in America. You see, the Bible in the New Testament talks about this quite a lot, and you could cite the scriptures far better than I can, Pastor Jack. The importance of gratitude, the importance of saying thanks. And I think that we have an entire day that's uniquely American, Thanksgiving, around that idea of saying thanks. It's a uniquely Christian thing, actually, when you think about it. Because how could an atheist say thanks? Who are they thanking? Right? I mean, seriously, who are they saying thank you to? Themselves? I mean, that's like really, maybe. I mean, that's incredibly not narcissistic. Maybe they are. Explains a lot. But you're thankful that a creator was able to give you this gift. You're thankful for a family, thankful you're breathing, you're thankful for all these different things. I think that gratitude is the fruit that makes all other things taste sweet. I think that if you don't have gratitude, especially for a country that you live in, then why wouldn't you rip that country apart, and then why wouldn't you destroy it? Well, gratitude comes from an understanding of the passage and the journey that your country has had. So you remove the history, you by definition then remove the gratitude. And it's very diabolical and incredibly pathological, because the people that are purveying it and communicating to our kids, they're actually themselves very, very resentful people. You will not find a thankful person teaching gratitude to another person. It's almost never. Ingratitude is passed from one ingrateful person to another, almost always, right? And so you have an ungrateful person passing upon their ingratitude. And this happens because one of the few ways that they can psychologically cope with the nihilism that sets in when you don't believe in an ultimate creator, you don't believe in the type of ecclesia that we're able to gather, the only way you can cope and find meaning is be able to get other people to be miserable alongside you. It's that old adage, we say it a lot, misery loves company, and my goodness, is that true? And so I ask myself the question, a couple things, and young men in particular, because there's a crisis with young men in our country. We've got to get really serious about it. It's a very serious thing. And people say, you're not allowed to talk about it. So that means I talk about it a lot extra, because there's a real crisis here. And there's a crisis with young women too, but it's different. The male crisis actually, I think, is in some ways much more urgent. Because young men come to me and say, Charlie, what am I supposed to live for? So find something that you could take responsibility for. Don't just indulge yourself all the time. They say, well, what does that mean? Responsibility means that if you're not there, someone else fails. That's what responsibility is.
That's right.
You're not there, your kid doesn't get picked up from school. You're not there, your small group falls apart. You're not there, your job is less effective. That is responsibility. Go find some and put as much on your shoulders as you could possibly bear. And it's going to get awful and tough, and go do it. Because that's actually what's going to give you meaning, and we don't teach our kids this. Instead, we teach our men in particular, you're awful. Okay, I got that. No, you're really awful. Okay, thanks. Go become a woman. What? No, I don't want to do that. and in fact, we tell them there's something so incredibly awful. We break them down so much that we wonder why youth suicide is going up so dramatically. We wonder why drug usage and social isolation, it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't have spent the first 15 years of that young man's life saying they're the worst thing on the planet. Maybe instead you should have said, go pick yourself up, stop acting like a punk, don't swear, stop doing drugs, get up earlier and find some meaning in your life, and that means responsibility. And that's how you got to talk to young men, because it's different than young women. And it's talked about in Proverbs, right? If you don't work, you don't eat. And I think there's actually a deeper psychological truth to that, actually, which is if you don't work, you don't find responsibility, you're not going to be able to keep going, right? What is the metaphorical truth behind eating? It's that I can keep doing what I want to do to the next day, right? And so for our crisis with young people that's happening, see what colleges do and what they should do, but they don't, we'll kind of talk about it. What colleges should do, let's start there. Colleges should say, my goodness, what an awful, broken, chaotic world that we have. I'm going to try to make you stronger so that you can endure the suffering better, that you can straighten out your path, that you can have stronger shoulders, that you can bear the burden, and then you'll be more prepared for the forest, for the swamp, for the demons, for the people that will stab you in the back, because you're going to suffer. But I'm going to help you make sure that you can endure it a little bit better so your life will be a little less miserable. That's basically what we should teach them in college. Instead we teach them this. If anything scares you, tell me and I'm going to remove it. Seriously, this is what we do in college. If anything dares challenge you,
Yes.
scream with your hands up and say, microaggression, trigger warning, safe space. I don't like the way that sounds. Remove it from the conversation. And we wonder why we have an entire generation, mostly, of kids that are afraid to leave their own shadow, are afraid to even to have their own meaning. It's because we have infantilized these children at the most important time of their life, when we're supposed to be able to say, you're not the most important thing in the world. Mm-hmm. Stop indulging yourself. You're actually a coward for looking at that stuff on your phone at 2 a.m. You're actually not doing something heroic by drinking more than the friend next to you. No one cares how many social media likes that you have. How about you go be loyal to a singular human being, get married, find a job, act with meaning, have a bunch of kids, and then go to church. That's going to make your life better, not limitlessly indulging in the next chemical substance that might be on the table. College does the exact opposite.
Charlie, you mentioned something earlier about suicide.
Yeah.
And
I've lost many friends to suicide, and go ahead.
Yeah, no. Regarding the age in which we're in right now, there's various ways to commit suicide. And one of the ways to commit suicide almost always is the way of losing hope. Yeah. When hope is gone,
that's a great point.
You're done. There's a lot that can go on in your life that doesn't lead to suicide, but when you lose hope, and hope is very, very, I believe, inseparably connected to purpose. When you have hopelessness, you're done. And that means you're done by either the rope or a gun. You're done. When you lose hope, you're dead. And here's the thing. A lot of young people today are in the basement, in their pajamas at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're actually committing suicide. They're en route to losing hope. Yeah. If they stay on that path, it may take a longer time. Satan doesn't care, as long as he gets you there. Somebody could lose hope in a matter of a moment because their dreams were dashed and the experiment blew up and it didn't work, or they lost all their money in the stock market in 5 seconds, and they lose hope and they bite a bullet. But the same terminus the enemy targets for any young man or young woman who sits in their house and rots without a purpose, Satan just licks his chops.
Well, yeah, and I've lost dear friends to suicide. A friend of mine from high school, Eddie, committed suicide. It was one of the hardest things that I had to process. And for those of you who have lost friends to suicide, it really does a torturous thing to the people around it. It's not an easy thing. It's not. And a lot of prayer, a lot of reflection, and still I struggle with it because, my goodness, you know, what were the steps that were taken there? It's a very serious thing, and our politicians refuse to engage on this topic. They just absolutely do. And this is a cultural crisis, and it's happening at an increasingly alarming rates. And there's a couple things that I think that actually have contributed to this, and there's not one sole piece of this. But part of it is that we have taught young children and young people in particular self-esteem, not self-control. And it's a very important thing, and Dennis Prager talks about it a lot, and he's phenomenal, where if you actually teach people, as in the halls of Harvard, it's this beautiful quote, and they're going to remove it, I'm sure, because it makes far too much sense. It says, the law are the wise restraints that keep men free. And what that really is saying, that if you do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it, you're actually going to be a slave to whatever those things are. And when Christ said we are going to liberate you from sin, he literally means that when you are free from the addiction and free from the sinful pattern and behavior that you have, but much more materially, as we have this in our country about suicide and self-worth, I think that in a lot of different ways, we have not been so as blunt and as honest we should about the reality of the world that we live in. I think that we try to tell young people that we somehow can create a better, more comfortable world for you if we are just able to shut up a couple more voices and do all this, when we really should be talking about creating stronger, tougher people that can endure the incredible persecution and suffering that is inevitable in life, because life is absolutely a tragic exercise in suffering. I mean, the Bible tells us, any sort of life experience tells us, we know that. And so once you are able to communicate that clearly, and young people say, wow, that sounds awful, but here's what you can do about it. Here's how you can actually get through it. And that's where we get this wrong completely and totally, where the conversation when it comes around meaning, what is going to keep you going from one day to the other, where you're not in your pajamas at 2 o'clock on the next day is actually a doctrine of connectedness. And we don't talk about this, where that a lot of times people need to know that other people are relying on you. And that's the idea of responsibility, right?
That's right.
Is that, of course, you have a responsibility for yourself, but why be responsible for yourself? It's because another person is going to want to make sure they see you at 7 a.m. because you actually have something to offer this bitter and broken world, that you actually might have something deep within the bowels of your depraved existence that matters, that you might have something that you can contribute for the betterment of the kingdom. And when I talk about responsibility to young men and young people, they light up. They say, "Oh my goodness, that's really something. I've never heard of that. I've just heard about how everything around me is wrong and is awful." And we talk about the responsibility of Christians, right? There's so much responsibility put on our shoulders every single day, and there's a greater microscope and persecution around that. But suicide is nothing to be trivialized. It's a very serious thing, and there's many contributing factors to it, a lot. And some of it, I think, stems from, in a lot of different ways, I think social media plays a huge role in it. I can go into a more practical sense of that. I think those little smartphones that we all have done incredible damage to social status of young people, and I think we have to have a real conversation around that in our country. But from a more serious sense, that I have this, is that there's someone listening to this inevitably by the law of averages. And all I have to say is, if you're thinking any form of self-harm, all I have to say is, you know what, you're right. Life is really, really hard. It is awful. But there's something that you have to offer that actually might make somebody else's life a little less awful. And that's a reason to keep going. And if just one person needs to hear that today, then this visit was worth it.
So Charlie, I want to change it up in a strange way to come into the conversation. Sure. So why is it that the physicians I know, physicians that attend this church, they tell me, Jack, the biggest thing to fear out there right now medically, outside of cancers and outside of other things, diabetes and all, the biggest thing to fear out there right now, and I'm sorry I can't say the name of it, but there's 2 flus that are out there, that's been out there for a long time. There's 2 flus running around that are very fatal, very dangerous, but COVID is way down on the list. But you wouldn't get that by the media. Yeah. You wouldn't get that by the press. COVID is for real, we get it, but it's not the most lethal thing that's out there right now. What's going on?
Yeah, I won't be able to comment on that in particular, but I will say, look, I lost a dear friend yesterday to the virus, and it's really hard to talk about, and still wrestling through that and reconciling it. The original mentor and person that believed in me at Turning Point USA, and he was 80 years old and eternally optimistic person. He was just, honestly, so if your life has been touched by anything I've ever said, or Turning Point USA, you can thank this man, Bill Montgomery, for that, because he was a 72-year-old eternal optimist who grabbed me when I was 18 years old, and I was lost. And this is a great lesson for anyone out there who are saying, well, what can I contribute to the world? Well, find a young person and do exactly what he did to me. And he said, Charlie, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life, and I didn't get into West Point. College just wasn't speaking to me. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. And out of nowhere, like, the Holy Spirit filled him and came to me at an event after I spoke at when I was 18 years old in high school. This man came up to me, Bill, and he said, Charlie, don't go to college. I said, what are you talking about? Don't go to college? What are you talking about? Who are you? And I'm in suburban America. I have good grades. I'm Eagle Scout. Like, what? Don't go to college? Like, and he had this smile that could light up an entire room. And he said, don't go to college. He said, I think that there's something in store for you, the likes of which you could never imagine. And this was a 72-year-old, right? And, so it was a very amazing journey, and I ended up not going to college and starting Turning Point in June of 2012. And he was the original mentor and traveled the country with me, and I wanted to give up 6 months into it. And he knew how to talk to me, I'll tell you that much. And it's a really important thing, right? Know how to talk to people when who you're talking to. He said, Charlie, you know what? If you give up, I'll be very disappointed in you. And that's exactly what I needed to hear, right?
That's exactly.
It's like, okay, that was it. Not getting angry and all that. And I kept going, and I was an 18-year-old, and boy, if I had a list of everyone that said I was not going to succeed, go back to college, do all these things, but this guy, in the most idealistic sense, he just said, press on, press on. And he was with me, and it was more than just a urging. He was the for everything from the Uber driver. You can't rent cars when you're 18, right? So when I was traveling, he helped rent cars. I couldn't check into a hotel, and he checked into hotels for me and handed me the keys. And he was there in the tough moments and the tense moments. Our operating budget was literally, $8,000 for the entire year, and he believed in me. And like a prism, I kind of look at this as a prism theory. His single beam of light, this guy that was living a life where he was just looking for someone to connect to, found an 18-year-old that was looking for that. And we've impacted millions of people at Turning Point USA. We're on 2,000 high school and college campuses across the country.